This happened a few summers ago. My friends and I threw a going-away party for our friend that is going to migrate to Canada. We went to this island, and it was during their non-peak season, so that means that we were the only guests there. We arrived at the island just around after lunchtime. A few kilometers away from the resort, there's this small village just near the port. When we arrived to the said port, the resort's service vehicle was not there. They alerted us that they're going to be late because their vehicle broke down. So we decided to stop by this small store and bought some other necessities that we forgot to buy in the mainland. There was this group of men around their late 20s that were catcalling us. Our group consists of 5 girls and 4 boys, and one came up to me and asked for my number. I refused politely, and one guy friend ushered me away from him. Thank heavens, our service arrived, but he was still staring at me, and to be honest, it creeped me out. When we arrived at the resort, it had cottages that were on stilts. You have to climb a bamboo ladder to get in the room. It was also made from bamboo, just your typical hut. Even the floors were made from bamboo. The bathroom is separated from the huts and is for common use. We partied, and I got tipsy fast because I'm a lightweight. I excused myself from the group and climbed up the cottage to change into my swimwear. My friends really wanted to go island hopping. I was also planning to take a swim in the beach and island hop just to lessen the buzz. I was not able to change since the room just started spinning. I decided to just nap it out. I told my friends to just go without me. It was a long debate because they didn't want to leave me all alone, but I insisted that they should go. After a few begging, they went on island hopping without me. When I woke up, it was already around twilight. The resort was quiet. It was a bit dim inside the room. The resort hadn't turned on the lights since the electricity only runs via solar and generator. They only turn on the generators around 7 p.m. I can already feel the hangover. I used my phone's flashlight to help me see. I noticed that the door was slightly ajar. I was sure that it was closed when my friends left. When I was about to close it, the head of the guy from earlier popped out, and each gave me that creepy smile and was still asking for my number. I told him to get out, but he was begging for my number. He even used his foot to stop the door from closing. I screamed, and he kept on saying in our language, which translates to "Ma'am, let's fuck." I kept on screaming, and I called my friends. What he said made me shake. He said that my friends hadn't arrived yet. He was standing there for hours, and he was watching us. I kept on screaming for the caretakers of the island. I screamed to each, and finally I saw the beams of the flashlight running towards us. He quickly left, and he ran towards the forest just behind the hut. I was shaking, to the point that I was not able to stand up. My friends arrived, and the caretakers told my friends about what happened. They asked for the help of the caretakers and the local chief of the island. They went on a manhunt to look for the guy. Sadly, he was not seen. We left the same night and just transferred to another island with a much private resort. When I was 19, I worked nights at this shitty hotel chain in my hometown, and it was generally pretty chill. You'd get your weirdos/creeps, but I can handle my own, and I got used to it pretty quickly. However, this guy was way worse than anything I had encountered up until that point. It was an average night, spent checking guests in, doing laundry, stocking, etc. There were 2 sets of doors at the entrance, the inner ones being locked after night shift starts. Dude shows up around 3 a.m. and rings me through the lobby phone set between the 2 doors. Immediately before I can even get my customer service on, he starts frantically demanding I call medical transport, which I didn't really know what he was talking about, but I try to help him best I can, asking questions. Eventually, I just let him in so I can get a better idea of how to help, but when I do, his whole tone immediately changes. He starts speaking in this monotone voice and has the kinda dead stare. I've never seen eyes so void of all emotions. And not to mention, he had no physical signs of injury at all. Obviously, I was freaked out, but tried my best to carry on normally, asking him more questions. After the first 2 questions, he just stops answering completely and continues staring. I keep repeating myself and he's just staring. At this point, I'm pretty fed up with him, so I say, "All right, I'm just going to call 911 to get you help." He then starts getting frantic again, going between begging me not to call and saying, "They won't let me go and I can't go back there." I tell him that I'm really not sure how to help him if he won't let me call emergency services, so he needs to leave. He didn't even seem to need medical assistance in the first place. This guy goes right back to ignoring everything I say and staring. Honestly, I should have just called the police right then, but I was overwhelmed by him and getting police involved is always a last resort for me. So I say, "You can rest here for 20 minutes and try to find alternative transportation, but then you need to go," and I go into the back to watch him on the cameras. 20 minutes go by, and I come up to tell him to leave, but he starts arguing nonsensically. I go back into the back in exasperation. The cycle then repeats for like 2 more hours. Finally, I tell him I'm calling the police, to which he replies, "Well, if you're going to be like that, I'll just leave." LOL. Shit was comical at this point. I'm like, "Please do." I've wanted that this whole time. I was so done with him, so I was basically yelling. He finally leaves. I did call the cops and report him too. The freakiest part was that while telling my BF at the time about this guy, he recognizes him from my description of his creepy-ass stare and pulls up his mugshot with charges for rape, aggravated sexual assault, and a bunch of other shit. My then BF worked at a homeless shelter for some years and had seen the guy from time to time. After that, I felt so lucky that he was just a weird, creepy annoyance for me. Who knows what would have gone down in different circumstances? Creepy hotel guy. Let's not meet. This happened a few years ago, but upon discovering this sub, it reminded me of that incident and I wanted to share. The year 2018, me and 3 other friends, we were all males in our early 20s, decided to travel to Bali for about a week since it was cheap, and we had the time, so why not? Our itinerary includes sightseeing, trying local foods, mountain climbing, visiting bars at the beach, basically a typical vacation in Indonesia. It was honestly quite a surreal experience. The country is absolutely beautiful, and the food was amazing. The only issue I had about the trip were the locals. Drugs were really prominent there, especially mushrooms. The streets were filled with druggies dying to sell us their drugs. I am not exaggerating when I say this. One dude even grabbed my arm because I ignored his 2-for-1 deal for a one-way trip to meet Jesus. I shrugged him off, while my friends laughed it off, suggesting that I may be passing up a chance to meet our Lord and Savior. He looked rabid and frantic, like he was about to pounce onto me like a dog diagnosed with rabies. I didn't feel too afraid as we were confident that we could handle them since half of them were not even sober. However, that is only the tip of the iceberg. The horror starts when we went back to our Airbnb for the night. We had an early day the next morning and were exhausted. The place was extremely cheap, and it didn't even have a proper locking mechanism for the door. It had 2 wooden doors which swing inwards, and the only way to lock them was to wedge a wooden block through the holes mounted on the door. It was quite a primitive lock, but it gets the job done, I guess. Everything was going well until the last night of our trip, when we realized that the wooden block was missing. We looked everywhere for it, but to no avail. I just figured that one of us must have misplaced it somewhere. We settled for using a selfie stick. I know it sounds like a horrible idea. Instead, since we didn't have anything that fits the holes to wedge the door close, we turned in for the night, seemingly not expecting anything since we had already stayed there for 6 days with no issues. I woke up to strange clicking sounds in the dead of the night. I got out of my bed and I thought maybe it's one of the guys, so I nonchalantly approached the noise. My friends were all sleeping, so I decided to investigate the cause of the noise. The ruckus seemed to be coming from the door, so I headed towards them, feeling extremely confused. Who could be at our doorstep at this time of the night? I noticed the doors were slightly opened, and the selfie stick was horribly deformed. I peeked outside, and I saw 3 people staring through the gap between the doors. They were really close to the entrance and were attempting to push the doors open. I yelled at them, questioning their intentions, as I noticed one of them was holding a wooden block. I was shocked and puzzled at the situation as I recognized one of the men. He did the overall cleaning for the Airbnb and pathways during the day, so there's no reason for him to be there at 3 a.m. The other dude asked if the wooden block belonged to us, as they allegedly found it outside our Airbnb. I definitely smelled bullshit, as there was absolutely no reason to do that at 3 a.m. I called for my guys and the 3 men immediately ran for it. I clued in the guys on the circumstances, and we stayed up until morning came in case they tried anything funny. We decided to report to the reception about their employee, but the description I gave them were not synonymous with theirs. They told me the housekeepers they hired consists of only females in their late 30s and 40s. This sent shivers down our spines as we came to realize that we had let a complete imposter in and out of our rooms while we were out. Luckily, nothing important was lost and we got out of the situation safely. I can't imagine what would happen if I didn't wake up on that fateful night as the doors were close to being opened. I was just grateful that it was our last night there. In the late 90s, I accompanied my mom to England so she could see where her grandparents had lived. I was basically just there to look after her because my dad didn't want to come and my mom has a hard time doing things for herself. Our agreement was that after spending a week in England, the second week we could spend in Ireland. But my mom is terrible at planning, so we ended up spending a week sort of in limbo in Liverpool waiting for the Irish Sea to calm down so we could cross on a ferry. It was September, probably the worst month to try crossing, and we never made it to Ireland. So anyway, for 5 days I had to try to find places for us to sleep at night because she also made no hotel reservations for our entire 2-week stay, and I was completely unaware of this until we were already in England. I picked a hotel that seemed okay, and my mom paid to sleep in a different room because she has terrible RLS and shakes violently at night. It keeps everybody up. In the middle of the night, I heard a man yelling in the hallway. He had to have been very intoxicated. He was pounding on the doors all the way down the hall and hitting the walls. Being the punk-ass kid I was, I made the mistake of acknowledging his rage by telling him to shut up. This really enraged him. He started beating on my door, screaming he was going to kill me. He tried the doorknob, and thank God those doors had an automatic lock. I started looking around the room and realized this hotel has no phones in the room. Like I said, this was the 90s. I went to the window, but I was 3 floors up and the windows didn't open either. So I just stayed there, listening as he did his best to break the door down while threatening what he was going to do to me once he opened the door. This went on for at least 20 minutes. Somehow, I finally fell asleep. When I woke up the next day, I saw just how much damage he had done. He smashed in my door with a fire extinguisher he had pulled off the wall. There were dents and marks all down the hall where he had dragged it violently from end to end. The worst part was my mom, down the hall, never said anything. When I told the clerk as we were checking out, he looked at me like I was crazy and making it up. I told him, just go look. Later I asked my mom about it, and she said, "Oh yes, I thought I heard you screaming. Was that you crying for help?" It was April 2008. I was 20 and living in Denver for a year-long work contract with a nonprofit in Boulder. My girlfriend, now wife, and my best friend Tim drove to Colorado from our home state to visit me for my 21st birthday. The nonprofit I was working for housed their workers in dorm rooms, and drinking was not allowed on site, nor were visitors allowed to stay overnight. So I booked a hotel room in downtown Denver for the weekend where we could drink in honor of my 21st. The hotel was big, very nice, and in a safe central area of the city. So nice, in fact, that it was the same hotel that most of the politicians would later stay at during the DNC convention of '08 that took place in Denver later that summer. My wife and Tim arrived Saturday morning, and we all met up at the hotel. The day was fantastic. We drank across the city most of the day. By about 1 a.m., we got back to the hotel. The room was typical with 2 queen beds. Bed number 1 was close to a big window looking out across the city. Bed number 2 was pushed against the wall with a door that opened to the bathroom. You couldn't see the door/entryway to our room unless you were at the foot of bed number 1. We drank more and chatted in the room until about 4 a.m. My wife was laying at the head of bed number 2 flipping through the TV. Tim and I were seated at the foot of bed number 1 staring out the window as we talked. As we talked, I heard some movement and the sound of a door opening. Without looking away from the window, I assumed it was my wife getting up to use the bathroom. A few minutes passed by, and I thought I heard movement again, so I finally turned around to look. I saw my wife still lounging in bed number 2 as she had been. "Did you get up a few minutes ago and use the bathroom?" I asked her. "No," she replied. "I thought I heard a door," I said back to her, with her just looking confused back at me. "Yeah, I thought I heard that too," Tim said, breaking his own gaze from the window. It was then I started to run cold and sobered up pretty quick. Very softly, I heard Tim say, "I think there is someone in our room." I lurched forward from the foot of the bed to look into the pitch-black entryway. I could barely make it out, and I wanted to believe I wasn't seeing it, but there was a man dressed in all black with a black baseball cap pressed into the 90-degree corner of the entryway where the room door and wall met. Absolute silence fell in the room, and it felt like hours passed by as I started to panic in my mind like no way I ever have in my entire life. We all knew. We knew we weren't alone and hadn't been for a while, and he knew we spotted him. Eventually, Tim got the courage to meekly speak in the direction of the entryway and said, "Hey man, is there something we can help you out with?" Another period of silence that felt like an eternity went by. He slumped off the edge of the wall a little into the light and made eye contact with Tim and me. We all just stared at each other. Then eventually he spoke up and said, "Is this room 1709? "No man, it's not," Tim said, stroking his beard nervously. He stared at us for a while longer, raising his eyebrows and shaking his head. He then turned around and left. We then erupted into a million curse words and paced around the room. I called the front desk. They told me that he was drunk, and they found him in the stairwell but directed him back to the right room. Minutes later, Tim called the front desk, and they told him he was not a guest. He was apprehended in the stairwell and taken into police custody. Then a while later they told my wife he disappeared, and they had no idea who he was or what he was doing. They told her there wasn't even a room 1709 in the hotel. We got 3 different stories. We still have no idea what that was all about, or how he managed to get a key card to our room. We were sure the door was closed. It was easily the most terrifying moment of my life. Always use the latch in hotel rooms. We got the stay refunded and about $200 in credit for food from the hotel. We should have sued, but we were young and dumb.